Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. The greatest advantage of being underestimated is the element of surprise. People tend to see what they want to see, and for 12 years my wife, Caroline, only saw the man I had carefully constructed for her. A loyal husband, a successful architect, a man who trusted her completely. She never noticed the ruthless survivor underneath. My name is Marcus Thorne. I learned very early that you're either in control of the situation or you're just a puppet. I've always been playing a much more complex game than anyone around me. Growing up in foster care taught me lessons that business school never could. It taught me that genuine loyalty is a rare commodity, that people will abandon you without a second thought, and that your only true ally is yourself. By the time I turned 18, I had developed an uncanny ability to read people, spotting every vulnerability, every weak point, every fault line that could cause them to crumble. I built my architectural firm from scratch using those same insights. I could enter a room and instantly tell who held the real power, who was faking it, and who would be useful to me. I created my success with the same meticulous care I put into my building designs, understanding that every single detail had to serve my ultimate objective. Caroline was meant to be my crowning achievement. She was stunning, ambitious, and came from a well-known family that opened doors to the social circles where million-dollar deals were made over a drink. We met at a charity event where I was a promising young architect and she was a socialite searching for meaning. I gave her that purpose, along with a life of luxury and the kind of attention that made other women envious. For a dozen years, I played the part of the ideal husband. I never forgot an anniversary or a preference. I paid attention to every tiny detail to make her feel cherished. I built her dream home, complete with the studio she wanted for her photography hobby, and the garden where she hosted parties for her influential friends. In exchange for all this, I gained access to her father's political network and business opportunities from her social circle. What I never showed her was my true self. That would have been far too risky. The real Marcus was a man who had systematically ruined 3 rival companies by finding their weaknesses and exploiting them until I could buy them out for a fraction of their worth. The real Marcus kept detailed files on everyone I knew, their private mistakes, their financial issues, and their family secrets. I did this not out of paranoia, but because information is the ultimate form of power, and power is the only real protection. Caroline was oblivious to the private investigator I had on my payroll or the elaborate security systems that a consultant had installed, which looked like standard smart home technology. She just thought I was naturally good at business and personal relationships. She was only partially right. 3 years into our marriage, our daughter, Lily, was born. Seeing Caroline with her stirred an unexpected feeling in me. Genuine love. For the first time in my adult life, I felt something that wasn't calculated. Lily was pure and innocent, untouched by the manipulative games of the adult world. She looked at me like I was a hero, not because of what I could do for her, but simply because I was her father. That unconditional love changed me in a way I didn't fully grasp until it was put in jeopardy. The first sign of trouble appeared about 18 months ago. Caroline began staying late at work more frequently, claiming her photography career was taking off with some high-profile clients. She had always been so predictable, but suddenly she was full of surprises. New clothes, new interests, a sudden devotion to early morning gym sessions and evening yoga classes. I might have believed it if I hadn't been reviewing our credit card statements. I saw charges for restaurants and hotels I'd never heard of, along with purchases from lingerie shops, even as our romantic life had become noticeably cold. The private investigator I hired confirmed my suspicions within a week. Caroline was having an affair with District Attorney David Allen, an ambitious and ruthless prosecutor with political ambitions. He was married to Judge Elena Diaz, who had used her family's connections and wealth to help him advance his career. I spent the next 6 months gathering proof not for a divorce that would have been too easy and predictable. I wanted to understand their entire relationship, their future plans, and their weaknesses. I needed to know exactly how far they were willing to go. That's when I uncovered the true extent of their betrayal. Through careful surveillance and strategically placed recording devices during Caroline's photo shoots, I learned this was more than just an affair. It was a long-term plan. David and Caroline had been plotting for over a year to frame me for a crime that would send me to prison for decades. This would allow David to divorce Elena without losing her family's political backing, and together, they would seize control of my business and all my assets. Their plan was chillingly simple. David would use his power as a DA to fabricate evidence that I was running a money laundering scheme through my construction projects. The proof would be circumstantial but persuasive. Doctored bank records, fake communications, and testimony from a few criminals who would lie in exchange for shorter sentences. Once I was convicted and imprisoned, Caroline would pretend to be the shocked, betrayed wife, inheriting everything, including custody of Lily. After a respectable waiting period, she and David would go public with their relationship. They had no idea I was always several steps ahead of them. I spent months preparing my counter-strategy. But before I could put it into action, they made their move. A federal agent showed up at my office one morning with search warrants and enough evidence to make the charges stick, at least temporarily. I was arrested, booked, and denied bail, thanks to David's recommendation that I was a flight risk with international connections. As I sat in that county jail cell, I had ample time to perfect my plan. They thought they had cornered me, but they had actually given me the one thing I needed most: time to set up their downfall from a position where they would never see it coming. The phone call came 3 weeks into my sentence. The warden pushed the phone through the bars. "It's your ex-wife," he said. "Her new husband, the district attorney, wants a word." I could hear David laughing in the background before he took the phone. "Have fun rotting in there," he said. "We just adopted your daughter. She's going to call me Daddy now." Then I heard Lily's voice, small and confused, breaking my heart. "Daddy? They said you're never coming home." Caroline's voice was icy when she took the phone back. "Forget her. You'll never see the light of day again. This is all ours now. Everything." They had no idea who I truly was. They had misinterpreted my careful composure for weakness and my strategic patience for helplessness. They thought they were talking to a broken man in a cage, completely unaware that they had just unleashed a force far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. After I hung up the phone and walked back to my cell, I started putting the final pieces of my plan in motion. I had spent my entire adult life studying human nature, understanding people's weaknesses, and building the precise kind of network and resources I would need to survive what was about to happen. The chess game had begun, and they were already in check without even realizing it. Prison makes it clear who your real allies are, but I had already known mine long before I got there. The best part of being underestimated is that people assume your calm demeanor means you're harmless. They forget that the most dangerous predators are the ones who strike from the shadows. My first call was to Leo Hayes. We had grown up in the same foster home, and while many of our peers had gone astray, Leo had used his survival instincts to build one of the most advanced private security firms on the West Coast. His clients included Fortune 500 CEOs, federal judges, and many people who preferred their business dealings to be confidential. What made Leo so vital wasn't just his resources. It was his deep understanding of how power truly worked. "Marcus." His voice was steady when he answered the secure line my lawyer had arranged. "I've been waiting for your call. You know what's happening," I said. "I know enough. Your wife has been making moves with the DA. News travels fast in certain circles. What's the next step?" Leo had already started putting into action the contingency plans we had discussed years ago. When Caroline and I got married, I had quietly set up systems to protect my real assets if anyone ever tried to take them from me. The business Caroline thought she was inheriting was mostly an elaborate front. My true wealth was hidden away in a maze of trusts, offshore accounts, and holdings technically owned by Leo's firm and several other entities I had set up over the years. Caroline would get the house, the cars, and the publicly visible assets. Just enough to make her feel like she had won while the real fortune remained safely out of her reach. But destroying their financial plans was just the start. Through Leo's network, I learned that David's political ambitions went far beyond his current role. He was being groomed by powerful figures to run for state attorney general and eventually for governor. His marriage to Elena was the cornerstone of those plans. Her family's political connections and financial support were crucial for his future. That's when I realized how to use their own strategy against them. Elena wasn't just David's wife. She was his political lifeblood. Her family had built their fortune and influence over 3 generations, and they had invested heavily in David's career, expecting him to be their vehicle to even greater power. Elena herself was intelligent and ambitious, and she had no idea about her husband's affair. The perfect irony was that David and Caroline had been so focused on taking me down that they had been careless about hiding their tracks from the one person who could destroy them both with a single conversation. Walter Gomez had been my private investigator for 8 years, specializing in digital forensics. While I was in jail, he had been diligently documenting every message, every meeting, and every piece of evidence that proved David and Caroline's conspiracy. More importantly, he had traced their relationship back to its very beginning. What he had found was devastating. David wasn't just cheating on Elena. He had been using his access to her family's business dealings to leak information to some very shady clients. While not technically illegal, it was enough to raise serious questions about conflicts of interest and ethical violations that would end his political career and potentially involve some of Elena's family in federal investigations. But I needed more than just proof. I needed leverage, and I needed allies who could operate where I couldn't. That's where Agent Brian Hayes came in. Brian was a federal agent who I had met through my business during an unrelated investigation 5 years earlier. Most people would have seen him as a threat, but I recognized him as an opportunity. Brian was one of those rare officers who joined law enforcement because he genuinely believed in justice. He was frustrated with the political games and compromises that let powerful people escape the consequences of their actions. I had helped Brian with information that led to convictions in 2 major corruption cases. I didn't do it out of civic duty. I did it because the people he was investigating were competitors who were using their political connections to steal contracts that should have been mine. Brian received the credit for brilliant detective work, and I had the satisfaction of watching my problems disappear on their own. Now, I needed Brian to understand that David Allen was exactly the kind of corrupt politician he had spent his career fighting. The brilliant part of my position was that I didn't need to lie or create false evidence. David and Caroline had created enough real criminal exposure to bring themselves down. I just needed to help the right people see it clearly. Through my lawyer, I arranged a meeting with Brian, not as a friend, but as a concerned citizen with information about potential criminal activity. I gave him just enough to get him started, letting him uncover the rest of the truth on his own. What Brian discovered was that David's case against me had serious procedural flaws. The evidence was gathered in a way that suggested they already knew what they would find. The timing of certain discoveries was suspiciously convenient, and some of the documents showed signs of being altered. But the real issue for David was that Brian's investigation uncovered the affair, which raised questions about David's true motives for pursuing such an aggressive prosecution against someone with no prior criminal record. Meanwhile, Leo was carrying out phase 2 of our plan. Caroline had been so focused on taking my money that she never wondered why my business had been so profitable in recent years. The truth was that most of my recent projects were just fronts for a much larger operation. I had been using my architectural firm to run a legitimate business while building a network of relationships that went far beyond construction. Through my work, I gained access to private information about zoning decisions, development plans, and political maneuvering that affected property values across the entire region. I never used this information illegally, but I used it strategically to position myself and my allies for maximum profit. Caroline thought she was inheriting a successful architecture firm. What she was actually getting was a business model she couldn't possibly understand or maintain, with obligations to people she had never heard of and projects that required skills she didn't have. Within 6 weeks of taking over my company, she was overwhelmed by problems she couldn't solve. But the psychological pressure was just starting. Through Leo's security firm, I started having Caroline followed, not to gather evidence, but to mess with her head. The surveillance was obvious enough for her to notice but subtle enough that she couldn't prove it. The same strange cars parked near her house. The same faces appearing at her coffee shop, her gym, and Lily's school. The message was unmistakable. Someone was watching. Someone knew what she had done, and that person had resources she couldn't match. Caroline began making mistakes. She frantically called David, demanding to know if the federal investigation was expanding to include her. She hired private security, which raised questions about what she was so afraid of. She started showing signs of paranoia that made her seem less credible as the innocent victim she was trying to be. David, meanwhile, was finding out that his political backers were having second thoughts about his future. Whispers about his ethical violations, questions about his judgment, and concerns about his personal life gaining public attention during a statewide campaign began to spread. Elena was starting to ask questions about his late nights and his strange behavior. She also began noticing some irregularities in their joint financial accounts that suggested money was being moved without her knowledge. 3 months into my time in prison, their carefully built plan was beginning to fall apart, and they still had no idea why. That's when I decided it was time to move to the next level. The key to playing a long game is that your opponents don't realize they're losing until it's too late to change their strategy. David and Caroline had assumed that putting me in prison would eliminate me as a threat. They had forgotten that the most dangerous person in any situation is often the one who has been planning for the longest time. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Freedom feels different when you've earned it by destroying the people who tried to bury you alive. My lawyer, Austin, had been working on the appeals process while Brian Hayes' federal investigation steadily took down David's prosecution. By the 4th month, it was obvious that the case against me wouldn't hold up in court. The evidence was full of holes, the procedures had too many violations, and David's motivations had become far too suspicious. But I wasn't just interested in getting out of prison. I wanted Caroline and David to know exactly what it felt like to lose everything they cared about. The day my conviction was overturned, I walked out of those doors knowing that the real game was just beginning. Caroline had moved into our old house with David and Lily, playing the role of a happy family while their world collapsed around them. David's political career was hanging by a thread, with Elena's family quietly pulling their support as rumors about his ethics violation spread. The State Bar Association had opened an investigation into his conduct, and a federal oversight committee was reviewing his handling of several high-profile cases. But they still believed they had my daughter. That was their biggest mistake. Lily was 7 years old and incredibly bright. Despite Caroline's lies about Daddy being a bad man who went away, she remembered the father who read her stories every night and built her elaborate blanket forts in the living room. Children have an innate sense of truth that adults often lose, and Lily knew something was wrong with the story she was being told. Leo's surveillance team had carefully documented every interaction between Lily and her new family. What they captured was evidence of emotional manipulation that would shock any family court judge. Caroline had been systematically turning my daughter against me, while David treated her like an inconvenient reminder of his wife's past. But the custody battle would come later. First, I had to finish what they had started. Elena was the key to everything. She was brilliant, well-connected, and once she fully understood her husband's betrayal, she would become the most dangerous enemy David could ever imagine. The challenge was how to show her the truth without appearing to be the source. That's where Brian Hayes once again proved his worth. His investigation had uncovered proof that David had been using his access to Elena's family business to gather information for shady clients. It wasn't technically illegal, but it was enough to suggest that he had been playing both sides in several major cases where his wife's family had financial interests. More importantly, Brian discovered that David and Caroline's affair had been going on for 2 years longer than I had known. They had been plotting my downfall almost from the moment they met, which made their conspiracy far more serious than just simple adultery. When Brian requested a meeting with Elena to talk about potential conflicts of interest in her husband's cases, he was simply doing his job as a federal investigator. When that meeting resulted in Elena discovering the affair, the conspiracy, and a systematic betrayal of her family's trust, well, that was just a result of good police work following the evidence wherever it led. Elena wasn't just angry. She was furious. Her family had invested millions in David's political career, and he had repaid them by using their connections to betray them while secretly planning to divorce Elena once he no longer needed her family's support. The divorce proceedings that followed were nothing short of spectacular. Elena had more resources than I did, and she used every bit of that power to methodically destroy David's life. His political sponsors abandoned him. His law license was suspended, pending multiple ethics investigations. His assets were frozen while accountants tracked down money that had been moved without Elena's knowledge. But the most crushing blow came when Elena's family used their influence to make David's conspiracy with Caroline public. The district attorney who had manufactured evidence to frame an innocent man for a crime he didn't commit suddenly found himself facing federal charges for prosecutorial misconduct, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Caroline watched her new husband's life fall apart with growing panic, but her real nightmare was just beginning. The custody hearing was a complete rout. I had months of documented evidence showing how Caroline had manipulated Lily, along with expert testimony about the psychological harm being done to my daughter. Caroline's fitness as a parent was questioned not just because of the affair, but because of her role in a criminal conspiracy that had separated a child from her father through false imprisonment. When the judge awarded me full custody with supervised visitation for Caroline, she finally realized she had lost everything that mattered. But I wasn't done with her yet. The house Caroline thought she had inherited was heavily mortgaged with loans secured against assets that were no longer accessible. The business she had been trying to run had lost so many clients and so much money that it was now worthless. The social connections she had relied on disappeared the moment her role in framing me became public. Caroline, who had believed she was clever enough to manipulate the system and steal the life she wanted, was now broke, alone, and potentially facing federal charges as David's accomplice. The final part of my revenge came when she was forced to sell the house, the very house where she had planned to live a happy life with David and my daughter. Leo's firm bought it through a shell company, paying just enough to cover the mortgages while leaving Caroline with nothing. I moved back into that house with Lily. 2 weeks later, sitting in my study and watching my daughter play in the garden I designed for her, I thought about everything I had learned. Caroline and David had made the classic mistake of underestimating their opponent. They saw my patience as weakness, my careful planning as passivity, and my willingness to wait as proof that I couldn't or wouldn't fight back. They had forgotten that the most dangerous person in any conflict is the one who has nothing to lose and everything to gain. They had also forgotten that true power isn't about what you can do in a single moment. It's about what you can orchestrate over a long period of time. David is now serving federal time for his crimes, his political career ruined, and his life in shambles. Elena took everything he had and used it to destroy him, proving that there's no fury like that of a brilliant woman scorned. Caroline is now working in retail at a department store, living in a studio apartment, trying to rebuild a life that will never again include the luxury and status she took for granted. The court granted her supervised visits with Lily, but my daughter made it clear that she knew who had truly protected her and who had been willing to sacrifice her for their own ambitions. Some people might say I went too far, that the punishment didn't fit the crime. Those people don't understand what it feels like to have everything you've built systematically stolen by people who claim to love you. They don't know what it's like to sit in a jail cell while your daughter is told her father is never coming home. I learned very early in life that mercy is a luxury you can only afford if you're sure your enemies won't use it against you. Caroline and David had shown me exactly who they were when they thought they held all the power. I simply gave them a taste of their own medicine. Lily ran up to me with a drawing she had made. A picture of our house with the two of us standing in front, smiling. She had carefully labeled it Daddy and Me at Home in her 7-year-old handwriting. Daddy, she said, climbing into my lap. Are the bad people gone now? I held my daughter close and looked out at the garden where Caroline had once hosted parties for people who had abandoned her the moment she became inconvenient. Justice, I thought, isn't just about punishing people. It's about restoring what was taken. It's about making sure that innocence is protected and that those who would destroy it face consequences so severe that they serve as a permanent warning. Yes, sweetheart, I told Lily, kissing the top of her head. The bad people are gone, and they're never coming back. My entire adult life was built on the principle that in this world, you either control the game or become someone else's pawn. Caroline and David tried to make me their pawn, but they forgot the most important rule of chess. The game isn't over until the king is captured. They thought they were playing against Marcus Thorne, the architect, the loving husband. They never realized they were actually facing Marcus Thorne, the strategist, the survivor, the predator who had learned early on that the only way to protect what you love is to have the power to destroy anyone who threatens it. The game was finished, and I had won completely. But more importantly, my daughter was home, safe, and growing up knowing that her father would never let anyone hurt her again. That was worth every move I made, every risk I took, and every enemy I defeated along the way. In the end, that's the true definition of power, not the ability to harm your enemies, but the ability to protect what you care about most. Everything else is just a set of tactics, and I learned from the best teachers possible. People who thought they could take everything from me and get away with it. They were wrong about that too. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.